And here's the kicker. On the day that you wake up and you do your secondary responsibilities before your primary responsibility, you'll never get to your primary responsibility. On the day that you do your primary responsibilities first, you'll get not only those done, but every other secondary responsibility because you have mental freedom.
Dave, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this. I was going through your book. And, as we talked about beforehand, typically with a leadership book, I can skip a lot and just because it's a lot of things that I've heard. But yours, you make me stop a lot. And I felt there was a philosophical nature to it. And then there was just a bunch of other elements that was very unique. But even before talking about the book, I'm curious what got you into martial arts. You're a black belt as well.
Yeah. And hey, truth be told, I'm a 55-year-old black belt. And if you watched Mike Tyson this weekend, he's only 3 years older than me. We know what happens with age. So I just full disclosure there. My day has come and went there. But yeah, I loved martial arts since I was young. And the reason I loved it is because it was filled with discipline and respect. And even today, you see people, getting all smack talky before their fights. But by and large, it's really filled with respect and discipline. And what I loved about it too is kind of fascinating, Julian. When I fought very non-emotionally. I was very clinical when I fought. I just was in front of my opponent, and I knew. Now there were times that you you energize emotionally, so I don't want to say that I was like Dr. Spock, but for the most part, I would just sit there and look and dissect what was happening, and problem solve, dissect, problem solve, dissect, problem solve, dissect. And get through things. And that metaphor for what it's been like to be in business leadership and even as a parent has been pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And so what is it just about business and leadership in general that you love? Because I can just see it oozing out. And I consumed a lot of your videos and some of your podcasts, and I can just see that love for it. And it's been 35 years now, probably a few more.
35. That's amazing. Yeah, 35 years or so. And the thing about it for me that I love is that it's hard. That's what I like about it. It's difficult. What people really kind of fail to recognize is that most difficult things in the world, most people can actually do. Now, I shouldn't. That's an overstatement. There are certain difficult things in the world that only a few people are cut out for. But I'll give you an example of this. If there's a company where a person needs to get a certain number of appointments in order to get a certain number of sales, in order to earn a certain amount of income, the selling in most companies is not as difficult as the prospecting and the appointment getting. Okay, once you're in front of the customer, if you have a really good product and you've repeated yourself several times on it or over, and you know the objections, you're going to get there. Even if your closing percentage is a little bit lower than other people, if you're in front of a lot of people, you're going to do really well. So if you have the ability to get one appointment, then you have the ability to perform at the same level as everyone else, as long as you work on your fortitude and you work on your discipline. And so I'll give you an example. This is a more practical example of this. If I were to say to a group of 50 people, come up to the front of the stage and there's 500 pounds up here. I want you to lift it. There might be one person who could, and maybe another who, if they worked out for a couple of years, would be able to do it. But by and large, 48 people, no matter how hard they work or how good-willed they are, will not be able to do it. Most things in life, in business, aren't quite like that. Even though many are, there are certain things where you have to be a certain level of academic in order to accomplish it, or whatever, or artistically you have to be there. But by and large, Bob and Mary Lou going to work on a daily basis would be able to get things done this way. If I were to say to the same 50 people, I want you to come up to the stage and lift 20 pounds 10 times. Pretty much everyone could do it. Now, there might be some people who be like, 20, I could lift 120 times. There would be some people who be like, listen, I could do 20, but I'm going to have to take a break in between, and I'm going to be really sore for 2 days, but let me work out for a while. I'll do it consistently. Most things are that way. And when a person goes through the training that they go through in martial arts or in leadership, they start to be able to separate the fact that here's a person who does well because they have exceptional physical capabilities. But here's somebody who defeated them because they have mental abilities that are well beyond that, and they just embrace the mundane. I always tell people in my companies, I say, listen, there's two things I want you to know right now. I'm going to bore you to success by repeating the basics, and I want you to embrace the mundane. Most people try to excite people with new things all the time just because they're flashy, even though they don't work. And they're always trying to make something creative and new. I will tell you, if you embrace the mundane and you're willing to let me bore you to success, you're going to be on top of the world and you'll never be bored.
What do you think it is about people? Because I've noticed that still in myself sometimes, that we have a tendency to make things more complex than it's needed. Just like you said, a lot of the basics is all you need in business and health and relationships and a lot of things, but we tend to overcomplicate things. Is that a human nature thing, or is that something else deeper?
It is. It is a human nature thing. Now, complexity, because this is one of the things that I help people with a lot. When people make things complex, they do it for a few different reasons. There are some innocent ones. Some of the innocent reasons are they just have ignorance of what's going on. So they don't really know how to grapple with it. For example, if you were to say to somebody, start a company, that's actually relatively easy to do. There are 3 or 4 steps you need to do to generally start the company. Then functioning in it and making it work are totally different. But starting a company is pretty easy. But there are some people that are overwhelmed just with the idea of the very basics, like incorporating and everything else, that when you talk to them about it and they explain what they need to do, I have MBA, Harvard MBAs that I've started so many different companies and I've sold them for hundreds of millions. They'll sit in front of me, having never done any of that, and we'll talk about starting a company, and I have no idea what they said. I'm like, I literally don't know what you just said to me. I'm just going to do it this way, boom. But so that's one reason, is they don't know. The other reason is because of pride. This is a big reason people do this. Now, their pride actually is manifest in more than one way. One reason that they make things complex is because they think to themselves, you know what you see, Julian, you see this in trainers all the time. Somebody comes to a training class, and instead of the trainer or the educator going, here's how simple it is, it's 1, 2, 3, they want that train. Their mission isn't to have the people who are being trained be really effective in what they do. Ironically, even people who own companies do this to their demise because their ego is so big. What they want, their whole mission is for everybody in that room to think they're super smart. So therefore, if they make things sound really complex and the vast majority of people go, I could never do that, but you're amazing, they have some sort of victory in their head, even though every one of their people leaves inept and they can't build their business. But here's another reason people do it. Because we have primary and secondary responsibilities in life. And quite often, we don't like our primary responsibilities because they're harder. So we busy ourselves with secondary responsibilities. So for example, and I use sales as a metaphor. The reason I do is because if you're a CEO, you're in sales, you're in accounting, or you're a mom or a dad, you can relate to sales metaphors like you can sports metaphors. So if you're in sales and your primary thing to do is to get in front of customers, make phone calls, and set meetings, that is the number one thing most people do not like to do in sales. They don't like that work. So what they do is they call their boss, and their boss is like, hey, how many appointments do you have today? And they go, hey, yeah, well, I couldn't get to it because I've got all this administrative work that I need to do. And they don't really have any administrative work to do. What happens is whenever we take a secondary responsibility like administrative work and we put it ahead of a primary responsibility, we know we're not doing what we're supposed to do. And now we need to justify that. In order to justify it, knowing that we have our priorities out of order, we have to make that secondary responsibility really complicated and really hard to justify why we did it all day, because at the end of the day, our boss, our wife, our spouse, our friend, or colleague is going to say, hey, did you get X, Y, Z done, your primary responsibilities? And now you're going to have to justify why you didn't get them done. And in order to do that, you have to have some long, big, complex story about something that was super simple. And here's the kicker. On the day that you wake up and you do your secondary responsibilities before your primary responsibility, you'll never get to your primary responsibility. On the day that you do your primary responsibilities first, you'll get not only those done, but every other secondary responsibility, because you have mental freedom.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I hope when people listen to that, I hope they rewind it back, because I saw myself in some of those habits right there still at times.
And by the way, that's the way we all learn it, myself included. Yeah. You could say that I've learned these things from all the other people in the world. Well, yeah, I've seen some, but I've done a lot.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because our brains is so good at justifying why this secondary thing is going to be important, or why we need to do that first, right? I could even think about something like podcasting, right? And I'm sure you have a lot of people to talk to you about podcasting. They're like, well, I don't have a studio and a team, a production team or anything. And you're like, you just need to record and use Zoom or something. Yeah. But then they'll make it more complicated.
Well, what's really funny is even if you think about the biggest people in podcasting, they all say the same thing. They just say, get content out there.
Mm-hmm.
Don't even worry about this. Just get the content out there. And here you have, I remember Warren Buffett one time was saying that, he buys undervalued companies. That's how he, even though he's not the world's wealthiest person, he's whatever, top 5 or whatever right now, anymore, even though he was number 1 for a long period of time. He is still, though, the number 1 person to have built wealth through investing. People like Elon built wealth through, I'm certain through a lot of investing too, but he builds his own companies. That's a different way to build wealth. Whereas Warren does have his company, but it was built through that. So he's better basically at the game of identifying a good investment and making it manifest than anybody who's ever walked the planet. Yet he said that he'll sit there with that 27-year-old finance graduate and he'll look at something and say, I think this is a good buy. And that finance graduate will look at him and go, I don't think so. And he's like, what about my resume? Do I have to explain this to you? Well, here you have these incredibly effective, good podcasters out there saying, just get great content out there. In fact, we just built a new studio. I kind of showed you it here. Our lighting, this is the first, actually, Julian, this is the first podcast. I haven't even done my own podcast in the studio yet. And this is the first one I've been on because we just finished a couple days ago. And so we don't have our light. We don't have anything really set here. And you kind of heard me kind of making an apology of some of that. We were just like, you know what? We have to produce this. We need to get it out there, and then we'll fix that stuff later on. So when you take a person like Gary Vaynerchuk, who says, just get content out there, and you have a brand new podcaster that tells him is wrong because it has to be perfect, what is that makes that happen? Pride. And pride comes with blindness. So our self-justification is fueled by pride, and we use it mostly to give ourselves a pass to be lazy.
Yeah, and this is a good tie-in talking about pride. And when people see you, they'll come across and they'll see 9-figure company in 5 years, and that's going to get the headlines. But a lot of times I've talked to enough people now to know that a lot of things happen for that to even become a reality, a lot of not so comfortable things. And for you, I saw it. You started over at around 41, went through a divorce, and you had the kids, and then just decimated financially. And so I'm curious on that. When that all happens, what's the first step if you remember that you did to get yourself kind of readjusted?
Well, for me, I've gone through a few difficult things like that in life that are kind of traumatic here over the years. But I would say that the number one thing is that we have to remember there are people that depend on us. So most people will do something more for somebody else than they will do themselves. Now, there are a lot of people who are narcissistic in the world. I'm not talking about mental illness right now, and I'm not talking about a person who sold their soul. I'm talking about the everyday run-of-the-mill person. Most of those people will do something more for somebody else than they will for themselves. So if you're saying to yourself, I want to just give up in life, but people depend on you, you probably get up and you'll do that. So we also have to, though, turn our focus toward that. So if you take the everyday run-of-the-mill Joe who goes through a traumatic thing in life and they want to give up, and way too many people do give up, they have people that depend on them in life. Now, one of those Joes goes on and turns it around. The other one just opens a bottle and slowly takes their life, okay? Or sometimes fast. They both have people that they depend on, and they both are very much the same person, but they're making a different decision. And the decision that they need to make is centered on what I write about in my book, the first principle of greatness if you want to be a giant in the world and go slay dragons. And that is to master the cardinal virtues. And the first of those cardinal virtues is prudence. And mastering prudence is the mastery of decision making would be the best way to look at it. And Julian, you know as well as I do that people don't talk about it really anymore. I mean, if you say the word prudence, you almost hear the word prude, and it's like some Poindexter with glasses sitting in the corner saying, I'm not going to do that because it wouldn't be prudent, and they're kind of using it as a wimpy way to go out. It's not. I mean, if you were to look at prudence like, back in the day of the great philosophers, it would have looked like a Marvel statue. I mean, like, total badass. And all sorts of strength, because the most powerful thing in the world is a decision. There is nothing more powerful in the world than that. You are here because of a decision. I am here because of a decision. people make first primary decisions and secondary decisions, all these things. But it's always frustrated me, Julian, I don't know if you've ever gone through this, where people give you advice and you don't know how to take, even though it's good advice. They'll say things like, you need to believe to achieve. I always hated that when I was young because I was like, well, I don't. And they would just repeat it. You need to believe. And I was like, yeah, well, I still don't believe. How do you do that? There are actually ways that you can teach people how to believe to achieve. I can show people how to do that. But if somebody says to you, you're making bad decisions, in order to get your life in order, in order for you to manage those difficult things in life, you need to begin with mastering decision making. And the person's always made bad decisions. They're going to feel a little bit like almost picked on because they're going to say, okay, great, but I make bad decisions. I don't know how to make good decisions. So there are 3 steps. And that's what's so cool about it, is you can take all these philosophical, heavy duty, hard ideas and put them in the most simple form so anyone can use them. So if a person wants to take their life and start to build a snowball that they're going to put on top of a mountain that's going to turn into an absolute avalanche of greatness, it starts this way. There are 3 first steps to prudence, mastering decisions. 1, desire what is good. If you think about that in a relationship, at work, on this podcast, going to the grocery store, anything you do, if you don't desire what is good, drive safely, buy the things that I need, do a good job here for Julian because this is his audience, build a company, help people make money, be a good employee, be faithful to my wife. If you don't desire those good things, nothing good will happen. So that's the first thing. And the hard part about it is that there's a lot of people, they don't desire anything good. They desire to get one over on somebody, and they're putting themselves on a pathway, even if in the short term they can get away with it, where they're going to be in demise. The second thing is know what is true. And then the third thing is act upon what is good. These are Aristotelian, by the way. This Aristotle used slightly different words. St. Thomas Aquinas actually did too, but they're usable for anybody. Now, remember, the cardinal virtues aren't religious. Okay, Aristotle wasn't religious, so to speak. They're human. They're human nature. Everybody has access to them. They're like the muscles of the will and the intellect that allow us to become stronger. We have American terms for this, like fortitude and stick-to-itiveness and all these different types of things, doing the grind. But what people don't realize is they all build on each other. So, for example, in prudence, if I'm a baker and I bake cakes, and I desire to make bad cakes at an unreasonable price that are ugly, I can't get anything done. I have to desire what is good as a baker. Great cakes that are attractive at a reasonable price. Now I make a bunch of cakes and I give my cakes out to 20 people, and I have 20 out of 20 people go, dude, I hate your cakes, man. They're bad. Okay. And I look at those people and I say, you're tasting them wrong. And I don't know reality. So I can desire what is good. And even if I desire what is good, but I'm making bad cakes, I have to know what is real. What is real is nobody likes my cakes. So I have to act on that. And I have to go back to the cake laboratory and bake some great cakes so that I not only desire what is good, but I know what is real. Now I've made great cakes and I act upon making more and selling them. See, if you don't do that, you have no access to the other 3 cardinal virtues. And those are the things that even if a person doesn't know they're using them, you think of all the greatest athletes, all the greatest actors, all the greatest business leaders in the world. When they have success, to the degree they have success, it's because they exercise the cardinal virtues and the 3 transcendentals, or actually there's 4 transcendentals, consciously or unconsciously, and they build on each other. So without prudence, you can't have fairness or justice, you can't have courage and stick-to-itiveness, and you can't have self-control. That's what leads to the rest of these things, which everybody knows are also part of success.
Mm-hmm. And, since we're talking about these virtues, we can go into the other 3. Do you think that, you think prudence is the most difficult one for people?
Well, I think that it is because it's the first one. That's the reason why. So without prudence, you can't have fairness. Can you imagine being in front of a judge who does not have prudence? So they don't desire what is good, they don't know what is real, and they won't act on what's good. How can they possibly be fair? They can't be fair. Can you imagine having a leader you work for that doesn't desire what's good, know it's real, or act on good? They can't have fairness. So in order to have fairness, you need that. Now, you can't have fortitude without those fortitudes, that courage, that stick-to-itiveness. So we think about this. You're like, oh man, that dude's a base jumper. He's got all sorts of courage. For our audience that doesn't know, base jumping is jumping off a low cliff or a building with a chute that opens right at the last second. It takes a bit of courage and coordination. Well, if you're 27 years old and you have two small kids and a lot of responsibilities and you've been uncoordinated your whole life, and all of a sudden you watch a video on base jumping and you're like, hey, I'm going to do that. You don't have courage or fortitude. You're nuts. You're literally crazy. So people see things that look like fortitude with people that don't have prudence and justice, and they're just crazy people. And why? Because, well, that's not fair to the kids. That's not fair to anybody. There's no justice in you trying to get some rush where you could potentially die. But it's not about base jumping. I don't make an accusation against base jumping. And if you're 21 years old, you've been coordinated your whole life, you don't have a kid and wife, and Red Bull's going to give you a big, sponsorship, go for it. I mean, if you're 85 years old and all your affairs in order, it might be cool for the grandkids to see grandpa go out that way, So it's not about base jumping. It's about, where that fits. So if you see a person who's a fearful person, it's because they don't have justice and they don't have prudence. That's why. If you see a person that has no self-control, which is temperance, the last of these, you think about that. Okay, I'm making good decisions. I know what fairness is and justice. I have fortitude. And now when it's sunny day and I should be working, I still go to work. When I'm married, but somebody that's pretty beautiful just walked by, I don't take that second look, let alone go further. Well, if you don't have fortitude, justice, and prudence, you are prey to every one of those temptations, and you will fall when it comes to temperance every time. So I think that's why your point is so good, that prudence is the most difficult one, because it's kind of foundational to the rest.
Mm-hmm. And I think this goes into, I watched a couple of your videos and you talked about winning the world without losing your soul. Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a great thing that transcends even just business, but who you are as a person, your relationships. And kind of as I've gotten to just consume your material, it seems like all these things are integrated. It's not business over here, personal over here. They're one. Now, did that come just from personal experience where you used to try to compartmentalize different aspects of your life?
Yeah, I think I did when I was younger. I had a good role model in my father, and that's something to be grateful for, in that I could tell that he integrated his life effectively. He wasn't a different guy on Sunday morning than he was on Saturday night. He was the same guy altogether, as well as Wednesday at noon, So I saw that example. Over life, you start to recognize that even more and more. And I think you learn the lesson when you're around people who aren't like that. Because if you're around people who do compartmentalize, the classic mafia who can go to church on Sunday and kiss their wife while they, go murder someone and sleep with their girlfriend, that's pretty problematic. The problem is that most of us don't see it in ourselves, not those extremes, okay? Hopefully those are easy to see, but we don't see it in ourselves until we have somebody do some sort of injustice to us. And if we have humility, we stop and we say, well, why did I not like that? And am I doing that anywhere in life? Where am I responsible for things like that? And how can I change those on my own? And then we start to integrate those things, and we have more authenticity.
Yeah. So another interesting thing I saw in the book was becoming a great leader despite your shortcomings.
Yeah.
I found that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super important thing to do, and you're old enough in life to kind of recognize. See, when we're young, we either think we don't have any ability or talent or skill, or we're overconfident, and then we start to recognize that what you're talking about, Julian, here is humility. Okay, so when you say that you can do well despite your shortcomings, that's humility. Humility is the best way to look at it is it's precision truth about ourselves. And most people look at humility and they over virtuize it. And they basically go, humility would be like looking at Michael Jordan in his heyday and saying, hey, Jordan, we're down by 2. There's 3 seconds left. We need you to take a shot. And for Jordan to go, nah, not me. Why don't you let Rodman? No. That's not humility. That would be like a false humility, which is like a pride. Humility is certainly to say, you know what, I am Michael Jordan and I have the best odds of making that shot. So I will take that shot and I will live with whatever consequence takes place. If I make it, great. If I don't, I'll accept that too. And basically being unafraid of those different types of things. Now, when he played baseball, he could have been a good baseball player, I think, too. But in a short period of time that he did, he wasn't that outstanding because he couldn't get that muscle memory yet. So if somebody had said, you should bat cleanup because we're about to, try to win this game, he'd have been better off saying somebody else should do that. Same person, okay, great athlete no matter what, different application, and humility comes out a little bit different in a different way.
And so the antihero, that was another thing. And I think sometimes in this world now we can, a lot of people can probably fall prey to that notion in terms of, you can see a person gets a certain amount of success being a certain way, and maybe he's not following those virtues, right?
Yeah.
But he's seemingly getting away from that. I guess what's your, rebuttal to that?
Well, I like that you mentioned it because in the first part of my book, I talk a lot about anti-heroes. Because when you look at TV today or movies today, there are very few, and I'm not like this big critic of, I'm not one of these guys that's just taking throwaway. In fact, I acted my first film, and I wrote a film, but I acted with James Franco and Tommy Lee Jones this last summer in a film that hopefully is coming out next year. Never acted before, but I was asked to do this, and I had a handful of lines in there. That was kind of a fun, adventurous experience. So I'm not one to just take all of Hollywood and throw it away. But if you look at things like even Yellowstone, which, wow, great writing, incredible story, the acting, come on, it's amazing, right? It kind of draws you right in. But no character in there is a good person. They're all very bad people. I mean, literally each person is abundantly corrupt beyond the norm. The reason this is bad is because in our society today, people are influenced by the characters that they watch. Now, that doesn't mean that every single Hollywood film needs to be one where everybody's objective in it is to, lay some sort of like moral character. Sometimes it's just silly entertainment. But you have a certain responsibility, I think, to know that you're going to influence and shape people in a particular way. I don't have any problems with those things in Yellowstone. I've watched the whole thing. But if I were making Yellowstone, I would have a distinct difference between the good people and the bad people in it. Now, I wouldn't make that distinction by way of the good people always act perfect. There's like B-rate movies like that out there. And the bad people are all bad. No, there's complexities. And I think that one of the reasons that Yellowstone is so good is that you see certain complexities. You see tension between the good side and their bad side. But they have every one of them has moral relativism. And that's the problem. They don't show a good person who has a weak moment and falls. That's really good film. They are all bad people who use whatever circumstance to get their way happen. That is it. They're only loyal to the people they want to be loyal to because they get something out of it. And this is complex. And people start to learn by way of this. So they start to have a moral relativism. Like, it's only good to do good when I need something because otherwise I don't get anything out of it. Otherwise, why would I do it? But moral relativism is stupid. It really is stupid. Like for me, if I'm interviewing somebody for any role of substantiality and they're a moral relativist, I will not work with them. Like if you say if they say there is no such thing as absolute truth, for example, let me put this as mild and kind and charitable as I can. They're flaming idiots. Okay, that's as mild as I can be. Because to say there is no such thing as a absolute truth is an absolute truth. Yeah. Like literally, is that true that there's no such thing as an absolute truth? Absolutely. Well, then there's an absolute truth. And you literally have at that basic ability to use reason and ration and philosophical discernment, you have none. Now, not only that, when they say there's no such thing as a moral absolute, what they are saying is that with you, my boss, if I can get away with it, I will. So they are telling you two things. They can't think, and they're going to try to get one over on you. Mm-hmm. Never work with a moral absolutist. They don't have the qualifications to sharpen your pencils unless you think they might steal them.
Yeah,
and they might sharpen the eraser.
Yeah, and this seems like it's another. This is why it seems like it's even more important to really know your values and principles and really be attuned with those virtues before you ever even start thinking about even making your first hire. Because you're building that cultural foundation right there, which got me to, there's a couple of questions you asked at the end of the chapter. I thought it was interesting. You asked, why do I want that? And then you went, or who will I become if I have to, if I have it? And then the last one was, how will the way in which I go about that shape who I am? And so I'm curious with you, with working with a lot of people over the years, a lot of times you probably ask those questions, and maybe it's surface level initially, right? Do you have to keep probing to really get to that truth?
So I don't really ask people those questions as much as I make statements to get them to think a little bit. So I believe in a couple of different things in the workplace. One is I believe in really a very strong sense of security in the workplace. I want people, when they're working with me, to feel very secure. And so there are two things that I remind them that are related to this. Who will I become when I do it? But I always tell people, listen, it's not so much what you do that matters. It's who you become when you do what you do that matters. So I've had people that come into a job, and I can tell it's a job. So there's three different things. There's a job, there's a career, and there's a vocation. A job is where you exchange time for money, and it can be a noble thing, but it's miserable. Why is it noble? Well, my kids need food. I want to be productive. I can't really find the great thing that I want yet, so I'll sacrifice in the meantime while I find the right thing. A career is better because it's a chosen profession. But, if you look at American Idol in the first week or two, you've got these people that can sing worse than me, and I can't even sing Happy Birthday. And they're like, I will be the next American Idol. Well, that's like a career. You can choose it, and that's good. But if you're not good at it, you're going to be miserable the whole time. Then a vocation is a chosen profession for which I am well suited. Okay. So I've had people that start with me in a job, and it's sacrificial. And I say, listen, I know you probably don't want to be here right now, but you've got to do it. Listen, don't think about the work that you're doing. Because you're beyond that. Okay. But who can you become through the work that you're doing, especially if it's something you don't feel like doing right now? And they'll stay longer, and they'll feel even better when they're done because it shaped them. And oftentimes they find a new opportunity to be in a bigger role because of that. So when you give people this opportunity to become a better person through their work, no matter what the work is, that's when they're very loyal to you. And they're also very loyal to you when you are not shocking them with a standard. Okay. So the number one concern, Julian, you probably know this, that people have when they have a job is, what does my boss think of me? Do they think I'm doing a good job? If they get to a point of jaded, they might not care, but they're on their way out. But for the most part, people are like, I don't know, how am I doing? I don't get feedback. I want to know, what do they think? And they go to bed at night with anxiety because nobody told them how they were doing. And they'd rather be told they're not doing a good job and know than wonder. And so these are the things that actually kind of get in the way. So what I do is I help people self-manage. And I say, if you want to know you're doing a good job, it's going to be quite simple. Here are three things that I'm going to ask you to do. This, and this. And they need to be done on a daily basis. Sometimes it's not quite as easy to define, but you can almost always find a way to define it. If you do those things, even if I'm not there to tell you great job, know that I'm saying to myself, great job. If you do two of them, know that I'm saying, not such a great job. That can't happen tomorrow. And if you did one, know that I'm pretty disappointed. And now you don't need me to tell you how you're doing. Now, any great leader will provide the feedback anyway. But that ability to give the person the power to self-regulate the quality of their work is super important. And that helps them become who they want to be through the work they're going to do.
And why leading giants? What was the inspiration behind that?
Oh, I love that question because it's like the most basic, right? The title of the book, Leading Giants. Because if you want to lead small people to do small things, you'll have a small outcome. If you want to lead great people to do great things, you have to give them a lot of room to roam and a big diet, and they will become giants. And the only way to lead giants is to be a giant. And you know what giants do? Giants don't swat flies. They slay dragons. And that is also very important to me because, frankly speaking, life is an adventure. And when people accept the adventure of life, and I have 12 steps that I walk people through in one of my seminars. This is like my kind of like master class seminar that people can come to the Dragon Slayer Theater right here where I am. And we do this course on leadership and self-mastery. And the first step, there's like 12 thought patterns that people really go through. I kind of address some of these things in the book, but I don't lay it out in the 12 because it's a separate type of workshop. But one of those is, and the first one is, be willing to accept that life is an adventure, which means it's got protagonists, it's got antagonists, it's got villains, it's got some backstabbing, it's got loss, it's got pain. You know, the story that's never been read or made into a movie or passed down from one generation to another is the one about the two rich kids who are totally handsome and healthy, who lived an abundant life with their amazingly rich, handsome, healthy parents who ran a fantastic, highly profitable business that never faced any challenge. And then the parents die at 100 years old, completely peaceful in bed, while the children are 80 years old and been taking over the business, which they passed down to their 60-year-old kids who are doing a fantastic job, watching all of their grandkids live in prosperity. Boring. Everybody likes the story of challenge and betrayal and loss and sacrifice and bloodshed and coming back around. And our life is that. And as soon as you start fighting against the idea that we will have, especially the more good you do in life, the more enemies you will have. And, even Mother Teresa had enemies. But then you take any political candidate on either side, or you take the Pope and the Dalai Lama, and you're going to see people with a whole lot of bashing pages and a whole lot of great pages. When you reach a certain level of substantiality, which doesn't even need to be that, it could be the most substantial that you are, frankly, if you're substantial in your home as a father or a mother, or you're substantial in your business or in your neighborhood, you're going to have some people for you and some people against you, because anybody who stands for something will. And that's why we need to accept life as an adventure.
Mm-hmm. Do you think anyone can become a giant? Do you think we all have that in us?
Oh, yes, I definitely do. Now, we all become giants different ways, though. And this is very, very important. One of the confusions right now, even in like the DEI stuff, and you see in the book that I even quote like a Harvard review that shows that this does not produce unity or goodness or productivity or effectiveness. I mean, this objectively speaking, let's remove opinions and let's just take the, hundreds of companies that were studied by Harvard, which is not any sort of right, bastion leaning anything. And you take the objective reality of the circumstance. Why doesn't it work? Well, it doesn't work because it runs entirely against human nature. And when you run against human nature, everybody knows it. So when people came into my business or any business that I'm in, I always say, look around, what do you see? And they say, it's very diverse. And I say, yes. Do you know why? And they're like, why? And I said, well, because we don't care about diversity. And they're like, whoa, what's happening here? And I said, listen, there's one reason you're here. Why? Because we think you're going to be the best. That's it. The reason you're here is because we are looking at you thinking you're going to be great at this. There's no other reason. You're not here because you're a middle-aged white bald guy. Okay. You're here because we think you're going to do the best. Well, that immediately sets trust. And it doesn't matter. The businesses that I'm in, we have people on the far left, on the far right, people that go home to every different type of person that there is, people who have a religious philosophy or practice and people who don't. And we all get along. Why? Because we have a uniting thing, and that's human nature. And that human nature, it doesn't lie to us. We know when something doesn't feel right or doesn't feel fair. And we say to ourselves, okay, well, wow, this is great. Why am I being appreciated? Because you think I'm going to be great at this? That's the reason? Yes. Not because you're 19, not because you're 96, not because you're a man, not because you're a woman, but because you're great. That is why. Your greatness is the thing that stands out. Now, it happens to be awesome that your greatness comes in that form. What an incredible way to make it even more adventure and even more like dynamic and to add flavor to this entire organization. But the thing about you is your greatness in what you do. People get that. They know that. They understand that, and they're united by it.
If we inherently know that, right, is it something that I think people are just, there's so much distractions going on, or like we know this thing inherently, like you mentioned, that we know this feeling, but why is there such a huge disconnect with that going on right now?
Well, I think the disconnect comes from a couple of different places. When you take a person's self-agency away, they are helpless. I'll give you a great example of how this works. In today's day and age, young people are raised. Now, I'm really getting into it here, Julian, but this matters, okay? Because I don't really make judgments about this. I make observations, particularly as a CEO, because I work with all sorts of people. Mm-hmm. And I don't want people spending a whole lot of time judging me as I don't want to judge them. But there's a huge difference between making judgments and being judgmental. I couldn't be on the show and you couldn't be on the show without making judgments. What should I wear? What should you wear? Okay. You picked better than me, by the way. Your judgment was better, but I made this judgment and I'm here. You judged what you were going to eat this morning. You judged what car you were going to drive. You judge what friends you're going to have or not have and who you're going to hire or not have. So we have to make judgments, but you can do that without being judgmental. Okay. And when it comes to raising kids, which is very similar. Now, the difference between a business and employees who are adults and children is that they're adults and they're children. So the analogy breaks down. It would be disrespectful to make it a full analogy. Let's not do that. But there are parallels, and the parallels are important. The first parallel is this, is if you have a kid who doesn't clean their room and you clean it for them, you teach them they're not able to clean their room. If you have a kid who loses a soccer game and you say, oh, that probably hurts and we're not going to keep score so we can protect you from the fact that you lost, they all know. Every kid who you keep the score from knows the score, but now they're taught that is so painful, I can't accept it, okay? And even if I lose, somebody has to pretend that I didn't lose because the worst thing in the world to face is loss. As soon as you teach somebody that the worst thing in the world to face is loss, they'll do everything to prevent loss. And then you take away their self-agency by doing everything for them. And then you tell them that they're actually a child until they're 26 years old or beyond. And what do you get? A child. In fact, it's kind of an insult to their intellect if you clean their room for them, but they start doing it on their own. I mean, it's kind of intellectually stupid, right? I mean, in virtue, it's weak, but I mean, how smart are you to do the job? Somebody else is going to do it for you. And you have all these protections. And then they put their kids on like Life 360, this app where, and by the way, there are some, I don't know if you know the app. I think it's called Life 360. I get hate mail on this and compliment mail every time I say it. And I want to be clear because some of the people who give me the hate mail, I'm not actually talking about. Like if you have a daughter, so what this app does, it tracks where you go, wherever you are, whatever you do, how fast you drive your car, how much money you spend, where you spend your money, everything. Like it is like helicopter parenting to the nth degree. Okay. And these people put their kids on it. Now, again, if you've got like a 25-year-old daughter who's single that just moves to New York City and you're like, Dad, can you kind of track me because I'm out here? I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about like willful adults saying, hey, let's have each other's backs and look out for each other, or a husband and wife. And I'm not even talking necessarily about a certain kid at a certain age. But when you leave your 18-year-old son on that app and you put him into college, you say, I don't trust you. You're not capable. You can't make good decisions. And I'm going to protect and watch everything in you. And you raise a coward. And you watch that kid and I see, like I'm in Florida here and I'm like behind a super slow car that's making super slow bad decisions and they will barely go when the light turns green. And I used to think when I moved down here, well, they're probably old. I need to be patient about it. I drive by them. They're 24-year-old, totally afraid, wimpy dude. I'm like, dude, you know what I want to see you do? I want to see you flip somebody off, squeal your tires, and then say, hey, I could take your girlfriend from you. I don't really want that, by the way, Julian, not even a little bit. But what I want is that young guy to be a man, to live life as an adventure, to be willing to say, safety is not the number one thing in the world. It's something more than that. And so when we live this life as an adventure and we allow people to make mistakes and we tell them you are capable, you get great things. I told my kids when they were 10, when you go to college or when you graduate from high school, you're going to be 18. You're going to make a decision to go to college or not. If you go to college, I will help you with college, but I won't pay for the whole thing because I want you to be invested. When you graduate from college, and by the way, before you go to school, you have to have X amount of money saved before you even graduate from high school. When you go to college and you graduate, if you graduate in 4 years, I'll help you the whole 4 years. If you take more than 4 years, you're paying for the last year on your own, as long as it's a 4-year degree. If you turn a 4-year degree to a 5-year degree, that's different. If it's a 5-year degree, I'd help you, okay? Then when you graduate, you have 3 months to live at home if you have a commission job or if you're going to be a teacher. Otherwise, on day one, when you graduate and you walk across that stage, you better be getting in your car and driving to your own place, okay? And if you are 18 and you decide not to go to college, same thing applies. because you've made it a decision that you're an adult and you don't need further education to go further. And I'm an adult, you're an adult. I don't live in your house. You're not going to live in mine. I said that to them when they were 10. Not one of them said, oh my gosh, I feel so offended. You're too hard on me, Dad. They were like, cool. What did they felt respected. They felt up for the challenge. Every one of my kids has taken me up on the challenge, by the way. And happily, all on their own, and they've gone through challenges like every kid does. I'm not trying to say I'm the greatest parent, I have the greatest kids. I do have the greatest kids, but they're normal kids. They make life mistakes and challenges and all those things. But they accepted the challenge because I gave it to them. Mm-hmm. If my challenge would have been this, listen, you can be 40 years old downstairs in the basement watching porn and playing video games, unemployed, as long as you want. And then when you're 40 and on drugs, probably, I'll beg you to maybe leave. They take me up on that challenge too.
Yeah.
So people kind of rise to the occasion that they're led into, and we have to be cautious about what we're doing to them to make them soft or to make them harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you kind of just answered one of my questions that I was going to ask. And it was about kind of leading in today's times when you're building a team. What are some of the, probably one of the most one or two things that's different now leading in today's times compared to maybe a couple of decades ago?
So this is an interesting thing because I've always been kind of a critic of the person who say kids these days, mm-hmm. or this generation is that, or this generation, because it's kind of a rite of passage for people to do that. And really, if I were to look at me when I was 20, compared to me at 55, I was an idiot. Of course, I could call it generational, but it's not generational. It's just I'm young and stupid when I'm 20. So that's kind of what that is. There are differences now, though, and they are real differences. The social media has been one of the things to radically change the way people perceive each other and the way they interact with each other, the way they have friendships, what they perceive as authentic or real. The manipulation of it is very big with what to think, from who to think it. In the United States, our educational systems have become, not everywhere, but for the most part in the public systems, they've been propaganda machines. You can now pay $750,000 over a 4-year period of time to become an idiot. And I can think of just a lot of better ways to spend $750,000. You could just take a hammer to your head. That's another option for that too. So, it's one of these things where those are real things more than they ever have been before. And so there's a lot of unthinking. See, it was a lack of thinking for pretty much all the other generations. You don't really think when you're 20. You start to think later on, and all of a sudden you get there. Well, now, starting at a very young age, people are being, they're not given an invitation to seek what is true, mm-hmm. and being taught how to think about what is or is not true. They're being told exactly what to think. There's a big difference between being told what to think and how to think. And if you teach people how to think, they'll come to the truth. If you teach them what to think, they won't even seek the truth.
And so I'm going to pivot a little bit. I have out of curiosity, what is the role that faith plays in business? What do you think about that?
So this I think this is a very important one, because for me in my organization, so I'm a Catholic who's all in, okay, but I don't expect that of anybody that I work with. In fact, I'm actually very dubious of the person who I've ever worked with who shakes my hand and says, trust me, I'm a Christian, or trust me, I'm a whatever. I'm like, mm-hmm. Red flag there, probably won't, because you might be using it as a distraction. Now, I think it was G.K. Chesterton that said something like, even if I weren't Catholic, I would want my accountant, my lawyer, and my attorney, okay, and doctor or whatever. It's actually a pretty good point if you think of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Catholic, but a moral absolutist is a good person to be around. So if you believe that lying, cheating, and stealing are wrong no matter what, mm-hmm. and that even if you don't get caught on earth, God sees it all, and that there is an eternal consequence for those actions, that's a person you can trust. Now, people who believe that don't necessarily always act by it, but if they really truly believe it, they repent from it and they want to change their ways and move forward. So just believing it doesn't make you a perfect employee or the most honest person on planet Earth, but it precludes you toward it. If you're a person who's like, you know what, there is no God, there is no right or wrong, there's no whatever, there's no absolute truth, I don't know how you can trust him. Now, to be very clear, I know people who don't believe in God, but they believe in moral absolutes. They're like, I don't believe in God, but I also don't believe in lying. Okay, well, great. Let's work. Let's work together. Okay. Now, the one thing that person may not have that the God-fearing person has is if that person's not being seen, they don't think anyone's looking, they might be more apt to do it. Whereas the person who thinks that they're always being seen and there's a consequence would be less. But that also doesn't necessarily, this person who believes in those consequences might be really weak. And the person who doesn't believe in God, but believe in moral absolutes is like super strong with virtue, and they are unbendable. And you know, when you're around them, you're like, man, I trust you, brother. Like, we are so different in our like ultimate beliefs, but we are so the same in other ways. And well, most of my friends think most of the things that I think, because that's like a natural thing, by the way. That's how you form friendships. Duh. Our today's world tries to tell you, no, that's somehow wrong. There's not a single group of people in the world or culture who's not more inclined to want to be around people like themselves, because that's natural. But what I've also found, though, is that some of the most fruitful and amazing and tremendous bonded relationships that I have with people are with people who think very, very different from me on certain things, but the things that we think the same on unite us. And I love that. I love to be around people that are a little bit different. So in today's day and age, when I think about how does faith interact in the workplace, I think that it should interact in by example. I think that the more you have to tell somebody how amazingly holy you are, the less inclined you probably are to be that. I don't start anything by saying, hey, I'm a dedicated Catholic. You know what I do? I go to work. And if people figure it out on their own, that's great, because it means I'm being a good example. But if they're not figuring that out on their own, shame on me. That's what I could say. And I have learned that, see, people are generally good. And people who think different than me politically or religiously, they respect that, especially when you're not pounding them with it. And when they know you're not judging them either, then they'll respect you where you are, because they know that you respect them where they are. And then you start to build bridges and unite each other towards some pretty cool things. That actually is totally exhilarating, by the way. It's super fun. When people can, because you can almost banter a little bit about your differences in a respectful way, that, you know, guys rip on each other to build relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you can do that.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think about just my friend circle, and we're all different. We're all different politically. We're all different career-wise, culture-wise, beliefs and everything. But we have a couple of those core principles, like you mentioned, that keeps us united. We can go a year without talking, but we still have those things right there. And I think that's the thing we're missing, because I think it's almost a superpower, because now I'm able to see the world at so many different lenses, because I've interacted with so many people of different areas. So now I can at least, I may not agree with you, but I can at least see how you're seeing the world.
Exactly. That's empathy. Empathy is a superpower, you know, because, like, you know, frankly, Julian, if you or me, raised where I was, by who I was, where I was, went through my life doing the things that I did and educated the way I was, you would probably believe many of the things that I believe. Now, you're a different person, so maybe not. If I was raised the way you were raised, where you were raised, or, you know, pick Damien here behind the camera, or any person randomly, if we had all of their same experiences, we would believe much of what they believed. Now, the one thing that would change each one of us, that makes us a good person in this capacity, is to not believe lies. When we live by lies, we can't have goodness. When we live by lies, we try to dominate each other. A person who lives by lies tries to make people believe what they believe. A person who lives by truth invites people to the truth. A person who lives by lies tries to conquer a person into it. And there's a big difference between being a person who invites somebody to the truth as a person who tries to beat somebody into a lie. And that's why radically different people who are united by not even believing the same thing, but by believing in the value of what's true, can be united, even if they happen to disagree about what's true.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on this, and because I think this happens to men a lot, much more than women. I think women are much better about this in this aspect. And this is suffering in silence, in solitude, as you mentioned. You've been through a handful of tragedies. People can just research that and see. And I just think about, like, handling grief or just handling you lose it all and start back over. And entrepreneurs, you're most likely going to have to do that. Usually the first iteration is not the final one. Actually, I don't want to be, we're talking about absolute. So there's no absolute. Maybe someone gets lucky the first time. I haven't seen it. So,
I mean, it happens here and there, but
in that moment, how did you start to get yourself out of, or opening up? Because you were suffering so much in silence and solitude. You were still performing at a high level. You're still a leader of your household, leader of a lot of people, but inside there's all this suffering and pain.
Inside I was dying a few different times. Yes. Going through divorce is very difficult. And I had 6 kids, and that happened when I was 41. But then my wife was killed publicly in it was that Waukesha parade where a guy came through and killed a bunch of people. And so, you go through different sufferings in different ways and different times. And then I've had betrayal in business where, I was told one thing by a particular partner and something ended up happening that was pretty grave. And it's part of it. I think there's 2 ways that you get past it. One way is to know that it is a part of life. The second way, and for me, I just have to draw upon this. And when people ask me a personal question, I can either give the political answer, or I can give the actual answer. The actual answer for me is to know that I can handle it, and God will give me the grace to do so. So those 2 things do matter. Now, every single time that I went through a really difficult thing and I was suffering in silence, and you are right, by the way, women are better at that than men. And you look at it statistically, men are drinking more, particularly when they go through challenges. They live lives of isolation. They have higher rates of suicide. There are all sorts of things that men go through because of the same reason that they don't ask for directions. Mm-hmm. They have a tendency to just get trapped in their world and not have the strength. This is one of those ways that when you think about like feminine genius or feminine strength, that it does come out. Their like willingness to enter into the experience of somebody else and to share their experience is something that is a very, very good strength for anybody to actually model, right? And to each their own. Some men are better at it than women, and some women are better at it than men. But by and large, that is a feminine genius, whereas men need to really kind of take a note from that. So I think for me, I hid most of my pain. I was pretty darn good at just waking up and going to work and having people not know that I was in it. That is also one of the reasons that guys get themselves in trouble, is that they can put on such a good front that people go, I didn't know it was even happening. And so I really recommend that you have a small, very good group of good friends. I think what social media has taught us is that somehow the quantity of superficial friends has value. It has none. Okay, all it is an ego boost, but it has no value. And it's the wrong title. Follower is a better title. Okay, and it's a randomly interested, occasionally following person who clicked on something one time and may never go back would be even a better title, right? But friendships, the person who's truly rich in friendships has 1 or 2, maybe 3 very good friends that are outside of just family, okay? Because we all feel a little bit different in talking to a friend than we maybe do a family member. On occasion, a sibling might be equally close as a friend, and you feel just as open with that person as the other one. But I would seek that out. I would do the work in good times to build good friendships with other guys, so that in the bad times, they're there for you. And if you do that, it's amazing. I mean, I would get together with my really close friends during the darkest times, and you would think that they didn't even like me with how they were like ripping on me to make me laugh. You're like, but I felt so loved because even in this trying time, they knew that my love language was, to make fun of being bald or something like that, right? And it gets you to laugh a little bit, but that they're there for you in a real thing. So it's a good question, Julian, and guys really do need that. In the good times, you make sure you build your good friends, so then in bad times you're there for them and they're there for you.
Yeah, it reminds me of my dad before he passed and everything. And he was on dialysis for 10 plus years, had amputations everywhere. And he always used to say to me, he's like, if I could find a way to make jokes and laugh, then whatever you're going through, you can find a way to joke about it as well and just keep going. And so that's still stuck with me to this day.
Oh my goodness.
Going through the business adventure now.
It's absolutely true. One of the greatest examples that I ever heard was a saint named Saint Lawrence. He was being martyred. They were grilling him alive. And as he's being grilled alive, he says to his torturers, "Hey, I'm done on this side. Flip me over." I mean, can you imagine you're being grilled alive and you take the opportunity to make a joke about being a piece of a toast or a pancake? I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So one other thing I'm going to touch on, because I think it's so cool, is 9 kids now, right? And 8 grandkids.
Yep.
That's a big family. And that's a potential huge legacy to be left behind. So what does legacy mean to you?
Oh, I like that question too. A lot of people say, "Hey, what do you want your legacy to be?" I find the question to be good and bad. Well, it's actually neither, but you'll see what I mean when I answer this question. There are some people that immediately say, "Well, I want my legacy to be," and they basically give you this Alexander the Great thing. And I'm always like, why? Well, how are you going to benefit by that? You're not going to be here. Like when you die, if you don't believe there's life after death, how is there value in that? There's literally no value in it. And if you just think it through for 4 seconds, you would see that it holds no value. If you've got most philosophies or understandings of the afterlife like Christian, you don't need that for satisfaction because you're going to have it anyway without that in death. So I think there's a much more practical way of looking at legacy. And the legacy would be, what good are you sharing with other people so that they themselves can ultimately have the highest level of happiness that exists in life? Now, so for me, there are 4 levels of happiness, and this is Aristotle at first. The first level is physical, okay? And we do physical things to become happy. We eat, drink, smoke, have sex, do these things, and they immediately provide a sense of relief and happiness. And in order, they're actually good, okay? Out of order, they're not good, okay? Consummate your marriage with your wife, awesome, good. With the neighbor's wife, bad. Eat, awesome. Even have a piece of pie, great. Have 5, not a good idea, okay? What happens is I'll use a Hershey bar as an example. When we have a Hershey bar, we have a certain level of happiness, and that's the physical thing. And use that as a metaphor for all things physical. The problem is that eventually we now need 2 Hershey bars to get the same level of happiness, because we have a Hershey bar and then we go down a little bit after the Hershey bar. So we have 1 Hershey bar, we just come back to where we were before. We want the rush, we have 2 Hershey bars. But now we go down twice as far. And there comes a point where now you go up again, and there's so many Hershey bars you can have before you kill yourself. So these people usually go from Hershey bar level to the second level, and that is accomplishment. So the first level of accomplishment is physical, or of gratification, okay, or happiness is physical. The second is accomplishment. So they say, well, Oprah, I was an addict. My life was horrible. I turned it around, and I won a gold medal. I wrote a book. I built a $1 billion company. I conquered whatever. And Oprah says, "Oh my gosh, that's great. You turned your life around." And everybody loves it. Okay. And then they say, but then I became completely unhappy and dissatisfied again because I realized I couldn't win enough gold medals, write enough books, make enough money to feel satisfied. I felt satisfied longer than I did when I had a joint, but I don't feel satisfied long term. It goes away. So you know what I did, Oprah? I started giving. So now I have a charitable foundation that does this, and people tell me I'm amazing, and I feel really good, and it lasts longer, and it is bigger. So they go from the physical level of gratification to the accomplishment level of gratification to the philanthropic level of gratification. But then ultimately speaking, every single human being stops, and they aren't ultimately happy until they grapple with the existential happiness. The existential happiness is what are you familiar with the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
Yeah, it was a gift given to me.
Yes, given to you. Every philosophy and even therapist major has read it at some point, let alone great historians. And of course, Viktor Frankl was suffering in Auschwitz, probably the worst place to ever be, and going through enormous pain. And he started to study, why are some people staying healthy and doing well here while others are dying? And he recognized that they were, first of all, they were philanthropic. So they'd gone through, they were in miserable physical pain, and they couldn't really do much for accomplishment, but they did small tasks to keep themselves busy. But then ultimately speaking, they'd be given a 300-calorie diet of mush and be very hungry, but they'd see somebody else who they thought needed it more, and they'd give their 300 calories of mush to somebody else. They didn't eat anything. And ironically, they became healthier than the person who they gave their food to. And they never stopped thinking about going home. They never stopped having hope. He built this into what's called logotherapy. So they had an existential, desire. Now, ultimately speaking, man's search for meaning is, why am I here and where am I going? And every single human being has to wrestle with their death. And once a person starts saying, what happens after I die? That's when all the true happiness can come into their life. Because they either say, there is no life after death, which means I have a lot more partying to do here. Mm-hmm. By the way, very bad idea and also not true. But if they come to that decision, it's the only rational conclusion, right? That if there's nothing after death, get away with as much as you possibly can here. All right. Mm-hmm. If your legacy is not going to matter and the rest of it is totally irrational, even if a person says, no, if you're good, no, it doesn't even make sense. And then the second one is, what is that? What is that ultimate thing? Everybody who wakes up in the morning going, what I love about today is somebody else is in control of my life and I don't know what's going to happen to me. Nobody. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen in their day. What are we doing today? You're married with somebody. What's the plan today? You have a boss. What are we doing today? What's the plan? Everybody wants to know. What am I going to do for school? What am I going to do for a job? You're worried about it. What am I going to do for retirement? So people work their entire life as hard as they possibly can. By the way, I'm not even trying to be like some sort of Christian evangelist here, even though I have my Catholic beliefs. I'm just talking to human beings, no matter where they are, right? As a human being, you're working your entire life to save for retirement. You're teaching your kids to study, to work hard, to do good. Why? So you can retire someday and you make sure that they're healthy when they retire and they're financially set when they retire. Why? For 20 years of pickleball? Are you kidding me? What about after that? Isn't there something after that? And if we would work 65 years as diligently and hard as we possibly could to get 20 years worth of pickleball out of things, what happens after that? And if you give it any thought, and the reason that so many people have so much dissatisfaction in life is because they're trying to find happiness in smoking, drinking, sex, eating, in accomplishing, building, selling a business, having all sorts of things, then giving a bunch of stuff away, and they realize they can't eat enough, drink enough, build enough, smoke enough, or give enough to have happiness, and that to wrestle with, how did I get here and where am I going? And until we start wrestling with that, we can't have any satisfaction in life, even though all three of those other things in order are very, very good and very satisfying. And I advocate for every one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And wow. The last question here is, if you could only share one message with your family before you leave, what would that message be?
Oh, well, okay. Now you're asking me a very, very personal one, so I'll just give it to you.
Okay.
Do everything for Jesus and go to heaven, because that's the only reason we're here. That is the only thing that matters. And I know that, I don't know how you feel about that on your show, Julian, but you asked me a direct personal question and that's my answer.
No, I loved it because that's who you genuinely are. I think in a world, we need more authenticity like that. We need more people actually sharing, because a lot of times, especially leaders of prominent positions and stuff, they give an answer that they think people want to hear and not the answer that they actually really believe in. So I 100% appreciate
that. Well, amen to you for your strength, actually, Julian. You have a lot more strength than most people do, and I admire your courage.
Well, I appreciate that. And lastly, where can listeners keep up with you? There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things going on in your life. Where can they go?
So if they go to Durand On Demand, my YouTube channel is probably the best way to do that. And I'm building and selling companies a lot. So you'll see me on YouTube, be very consistent, because my primary thing is not YouTube. It's to build companies, lead them, and then sell them. And one of the things that, and I write books and I do a lot of coaching too. My primary business is not coaching. Although I do really enjoy it. I love helping people become dragon slayers and giants. So I will have enough content on YouTube for you to go back and have it make sense. And there's hundreds of videos anyway. So even if you haven't been a part of it and a new one doesn't come out for a little while, kind of prepare my audience, because I have to go dark for just a little bit while I'm getting these things done. And I'll probably be only posting maybe once every couple of weeks for a little while and go from there.
Yeah, you have tons of content. They'll have the book as well to get when it comes out in February, and so there's plenty of material there. I couldn't even go through it all as I was prepping and getting to learn about you more. So there'll be plenty of stuff for them to do. So I really appreciate this conversation. We probably could have did a Joe Rogan style and talked for 3 hours easily.
I think we could have. I think that we'd if you're ever in Southern Florida, we'll have to get together and have a beer.
Yeah. I was just in Miami a couple weeks ago.
Oh yeah? Where's home for you?
It's in Nashville.
Oh, Nashville. We're not far away. I've got partners in Nashville. One of these days we're going to have to catch up live.
Yeah. I'll be back in that area because I really enjoyed it. So, and the weather's better. So I'll be back.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Julian.
Thank you again. And for listeners out there, stay awesome, be limitless, and always go be the CEO of your health and your life. Peace.